He's got some interesting anecdotes about the people and events at Fort Phil Kearny, stuff you won't read about or have heard anywhere else. It's gonna all be brand new information for most of us. And so, Sonny, it's up to you.
Okay. Just write down one more thing here come to my mind. I was driving out here.
Oh, meeting's adjourned, by the way.
Okay. Well, I appreciate y'all inviting me out today, and normally I make it for the meals too, being a bachelor, it's kind of an important part of a guy's life, but I don't know, the food here has always been wonderful, it's worth the drive just to live for itself there. When I started to think about this, and put this together, I got to think, okay, well, we hear a lot about the characters and the big events of Fort Phil Kearny. Most people, that's about all they're gonna get, and not a lot of those too. I thought I'd just go over some things, and some of you might know about this, and maybe some of you lived through it, I'm not sure, but anyway, we'll talk a little bit about people and events of Fort Phil Kearny. Most of what you're not known to the, to the general public, to those that read just your general history book. But the first person I wanted to talk about was, and I see Mary Ellen is with us today, one of her favorite people, Margaret Carrington, or Margaret Sullivan Carrington. Ever so often it raises up that she couldn't have written that because there's so much detail, and Henry must have wrote the book abstracted. And I'm disputing that today, as many people have, and I think that Mary Ellen's proved the case, and other people have too. Margaret had come from a very, very prominent family in Kentucky and Ohio. And she was well educated. Her father, Joseph Sullivan, was a big heavy hitter in politics and the educational events in Columbus, Ohio. And so she had a good education. And I can just see her sometimes stuck in one of these posts like Fort Sedgwick, where her and Henry would spend some time after the Fort Phil Kearny. And everybody said, well, how'd you get all those facts? It must have been Henry that gave. Well, yeah, he did give it to her. There's no doubt of that. But he took the entire history of all the papers, files, and everything for the 18th Infantry when he left Fort Phil Kearny in January of 1867. So he probably had those sitting in the living room at home. And so she had access to those. And again, I think she was probably a very good researcher and educator in her own right. But she, it had kind of originated in the spring of 1866 when General Sherman had come to Fort Kearny, Nebraska, and then doing a tour up through all the forts. And he had talked to Margaret Carrington and some of the other women of Fort that were going to be going up to the Bozeman Trail Force, and advised them to keep a journal. I don't know how many others did. We really don't have a lot of evidence, but we know that Margaret kept a very meticulous journal and was very well, in terms of observations about Indians and other things. Her father, Joseph Sullivan, mentioned, was big into education, and so I'm pretty sure that she had a strong education to work with. So she began writing that book before the embers of Fort Phil Kearny had even cooled off, probably, in that fall of 1868. And then it would be published not very long after that. And then, unfortunately, Margaret did die in 1870 at the age of 39. So kind of a tragic thing. I think she might have done a lot more and been a lot more prominent in terms of the history of the West, if not for her early death. Just an aside, people might not know, any Ohio State University graduates here? Ohio State, any OSU? Oh, okay, we got one there.
We got a granddaughter.
Oh, you got a granddaughter, okay. Well, I've been to some deals and about every hand went up. And I'd look out and I'd see this orange and silver, or this red and silver, whatever they wear as their colors. But anyway, they were wanting to establish a technical and agricultural college, much like CSU started down in Colorado, and not too long afterwards of that. But anyway, so they wanted to establish that in Columbus, Ohio. And Joseph Sullivan was a big, like I say, mentioned, a pretty prominent person there. But he had this amazing dedication to education. And he's credited as one of the founding forces behind Ohio State University, beginning after his daughter died in 1870. He eventually would go on to serve as trustee, treasurer, a number of other things. And I think there's still a Sullivan Hall at Ohio State University. So if you know any OSU graduates, ask them, do you know anything about Joseph Sullivan? And if they say yes, then you know that they are serious about their university's history. But as you know, today that university is one of the largest in the United States and quite prominent in football, of all things. But Joseph Sullivan, again, was very prominent in that, and I'm pretty sure that he had memories of his daughter, and I'm sure it was a tragic thing for him to lose her, at that early age of 39, as it was for her husband, Henry Carrington. But she, after she passed away, then Absaraka, I hear it pronounced several different ways. Land of the Crow is kind of what it translates out to be. And so and it really was our first, and is still probably our most prominent first-hand account of any depth and any strength of the Bozeman Trail and of Fort Phil Kearny. So a very unique book. If you don't have it in your library, I'd sure advise you to get it. It can be purchased at the Fort Phil Kearny bookstore when you come out, and I know you'll all go out there this summer.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Anybody has read Margaret's book, the best way to describe the writing is elegant. You won't see anybody write that way these days. It's great.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we were right in the heart of the Victorian period. A number of great writers, Henry James, come out of there, coming and written. England had a number of heavy-hitting writers, and as Mike says, that she was elegant, and she did have that education. She's much more elegant than Henry was in most cases. So anyway, I guess my thought is that I believe she wrote that book. I know Mary Ellen believes she wrote the book, and that we have to recognize her. And then later, of course, when My Army Life was published, that would present another Mrs. Carrington's opinion of what happened out here. And that one, I don't know, that one at times you kind of wonder what point Henry Carrington had something to do with the writing of it. So that's just kind of some of the story of Margaret Carrington. Again, a well-educated, really, I guess you would call her kind of a pioneer in terms of women's literature in the United States. So again, yes, Dave.
Is Sullivan Ridge named after her father?
Yes, it is. After her family, after him. Yeah. They came up from Kentucky and then came up to Columbus, Ohio. Very established up there. But yeah, that was named for her family. So if anybody asks you, what's that ridge called? And you go, Sullivan Ridge. And they say, well, how to get that name? It was named after Margaret Carrington's family.
Could you explain to people what Sullivan's Ridge is and where it is in relation to the fort?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Sullivan? Well, it's to the north, right to the north of the fort site. And it's the first thing you see up in the bluff. I think we still have our Indian figures up there in the book for several years. So, but anyway, it's right to the north of the fort. Very prominent area. And strategically during the fighting that took place around Fort Phil Kearny, it was very important. The Indians used it to observe and look down on the fort. For those of you that might be into military strategy and everything, one thing is you normally don't build in a hole, you don't build low, and you don't give up the high ground. So probably technically they should have built the fort on top of Sullivan Ridge. Instead they built, or the next one, to the south of there, up where the lookouts were. But the Indians used it, and they would come up there a lot, and eventually the Army started to put pickets up there to try to keep the Indians from using it as an observation post. Just to look, make it look right down the fort, you know, and see what's going on, see who's going where and who's doing what. But yeah, it's now it's getting covered with houses a little bit. The Open Trail Association has purchased some land to preserve the view shed up there, and so it's, but it's and I had 5 acres up there one time. I thought this would be a good place. Nobody's ever going to be up here for years. Well, about 3 or 4 years. Neighbors all over the place. And then you stand out there in the wind in the winter, and you think maybe I won't live up here. For those of you that might have been down there, they've seen that in that way. But yeah, but Sullivan, it's right. It's the big ridge right to the north of the fort. Any other questions about that aspect of things? So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about Margaret, and just the fact that pioneer, writer, very good observer. I think that, you know, she was quite a godsend in terms of giving us, you know, an account of the history of Fort Phil Kearny. The next person I'd like to talk about is our old friend John Portuguese Phillips. I was corrected quite heavily when I said Portuguese Phillips by a historian down at the University of Wyoming who was Portuguese. And he says, Portuguese is like calling somebody a dirty name. You know, and so, you know, it should be, you should be called Portuguese, not Portuguese. So anyway, that's just kind of a little thing of how people get touchy you know, about names and about various things like that. And let me just quickly find my info. Oh, I forget him. But anyway, Phillips, you know, he'd come here, supposedly he might have been, he supposedly jumped a ship in the Northwest, and then got news. Gold mining crews came down with Captain Robert Bailey's party from up in Idaho, and they explored along the Bighorns looking for gold. Didn't find a whole lot. They did lose 2 men, and then they came to Fort Phil Kearny, and Colonel Carrington hired all 50 odd of them as guards for the haying parties, the herding parties for the animals, and just as a general security force around there. And so Phillips has gotten that. Then he also, but the big money was not so much in that. It was in the carrying of mail and correspondence and such back and forth between Fort Laramie and Fort Phil Kearny. So anyway, his big claim to fame, of course, was that he managed to make a ride. Probably not alone. Everybody said, oh, he went by himself. Probably not. I think there's at least one, maybe 2 other people. Named Daniel Dixon is touted on that either rode with him part way or some of the way, and it probably was a case of a part way attachment, because I'm sure they were going to make sure that if one got captured, the Indians wouldn't get both of them. But anyway, Phillips, you know, he had a Spencer carbine, which is a state-of-the-art gun for that period, and then and so Carrington gave him that, and 100 rounds of ammunition, so he was well armed. And so then he took off and eventually made it down to Fort Laramie, and his ride became pretty infamous or not infamous, but pretty famous, you know, as getting the fort, started getting the Fetterman battle. Things change so fast in this history business. Getting the Fetterman battle information out. So he's credited with that. Then after that, he had what I thought was one of the more interesting events in his life. Probably more exciting than his original ride down to Fort Laramie in December of 1866. He was calling mail in the spring of 1867, and at one point he was gone for a week, and and a person that I studied quite heavily at Fort Phil Kearny, the quartermaster, Captain George Danby, he said, "Where you been? You know, I'm not going to pay you. Tell me, you've been holed up in Fort Laramie, or you've been traveling." And so Phillips had the story that, yeah, he was out, and there had been another mail carrier that got killed a few weeks before that, named Belvosa, and he said he found the mail. He said he found part of the mail that Belvosa had been carrying scattered around. And then he said a bunch of Indians got right after him. And he said he found himself surrounded by 15 Sioux in War Point. With humorous self-deprecation, he wrote in a report to his superiors that he had escaped, but noted that without aid of my faithful horse and good revolver, would have lost my hair, the part of my body I feel most anxious about on the prairie. And so he continued to work as a mail carrier until the fort closed, and then went on to run roadhouses and things down around Cheyenne and up and down that southwestern part of Wyoming. But again, quite a character, and the historian Grace Raymond Hebert kind of was the one that kind of established him as touted his story, you know, of the ride. And the story was that he took Colonel Carrington's horse, in the Gray Eagle, and that's the one they rode all the way to Fort Laramie. Well, I found accounts that shows he switched horses in Fort Reno, which is only 56 miles south of here, and a few things like that. But it's still quite an accomplishment in that way. And again, Phillips is one of those guys that, you know, his true story is as fascinating as some of the legends that come up about him, riding alone and all that.
Sonny, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Having grown up 30 miles from Fort Laramie, I've heard those stories forever about his horse dying as soon as he got
Oh, he
in
dropped
front
dead
of
on
old
the
Bedlam.
dropped dead on the parade ground. Yeah.
Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve.
Christmas
Yeah,
Eve.
Christmas
They were
Eve.
having a big ball there, you know, big gala event, and everybody was, and they had like 10 companies of troops, about 3 times as many as they had at Fort Phil Kearny down there at Fort Laramie at that time. But yeah, supposedly he rode up in Gray Eagle, and there's a monument. There's 2 monuments. One up here, if you go out there, that's built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I've had some heated discussion, not heated, but interesting discussions about that. I had a British gentleman come up, and he says he wanted us to change the wording on the historic marker at the Portuguese Phillips Monument, because it reads, "He rode through Indian-infested country." And he said that should be changed. And so we got a little heated. I said, "Well, how about the Hottentots? You guys turned into dog food over there in South Africa." And, you know, yeah, but anyway, so there's a monument out here. You know, it was done in the 1900s. And then down, I can't remember where that one down there at Fort Laramie was built. But there's a monument to the horse down there at Fort Laramie, which of course has all those legends that it was Gray Eagle and died right there on the parade ground. And again, as I say, I think it's pretty well established that he had switched mounts. But still, what an accomplishment. You know. I wouldn't have wanted to do it. You know. And I think he got paid like $300 for it. It was big money back then. At that time, an Army private was getting paid $16 or $13 or $16, I think $13 a month. A sergeant was making $17 a month. And then all of a sudden, you know, Phil was making like $300, which was as much as a colonel made for this one right there. Any questions?
There's also got a line in the cemetery in Cheyenne. His grave has got a monument.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, he's buried in Cheyenne, and it does have a memorial there. And he was, and like I say, he got credit for taking the news, and so and he's one of the more prominent people. Most people know something about him. A lot of poems were written about him back in the late 19th and early 20th century. You'll run across those in school books and things like that. You know, it's kind of like a hero of the moment. You know, one of the funniest things I ever saw was my old historian friend Bob Murray. We had to work on some stuff down at the library, but they had an exposure that somebody had thrown away, like a little Polaroid exposure, but it was white, it hadn't exposed right, so it's just a white blank. And Bob had put it up on the board, put a note below it, rare photograph of Portuguese Phillips arriving at Fort Laramie in a snowstorm, wearing a white buffalo robe on his white horse. So it was kind of fun that way. Over the years, I've had a lot of fun with historians. Just another little aside. I'm getting to the stage now where I think if I haven't earned the right, I'm going to take it anyway to tell the story once in a while. I was setting up at the Wagon Box one time with Doug Scott and Neil Mang, a lot of pretty heavy hitters in the Western history business, and got to talking about the Fort or the Federal Little Bighorn survivors, you know. And so I said, well, it's like 150 sole survivor accounts of the Little Bighorn, and it was Richard Fox, and he's a pretty famous archaeologist. He worked out here and then up at the Little Bighorn lot. And Richard says, well, maybe if they all would have stuck around, it turned out different. So anyway, so that's kind of the Phillips, additions to the Phillips story. Any questions on anything right at this point here?
Did you ever come across a soldier by the name of Spurrier?
Not that I can pull out and remember.
There was a fellow that lived in Story, Dick Spurrier, and I think he said his father was one of the soldiers that Fort Kearney came back and settled in Story.
Oh, really?
And then he was friends with my grandfather on
Mhm.
the mother's side, and we visited the knob there where the fort was
Mhm.
before any of this other stuff was built.
Mm-hmm.
And some historical society, maybe the county, put up a fence. You recall the first one they put up there was not even where the stockade was.
Oh, yeah,
Kind of an illustration. And he says, well, those people should have come and got a hold of me. He says, I know where the buildings were. And he shook his foot. I'll remember this.
Uh-huh.
And he scraped his toe in the gravel and he says, well, look here's a piece of melted glass from one of the buildings.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those discoveries like that.
Yeah.
I know Carl Roseland surveyed out like a lot of the building corners of the fort. And he went off of Carrington's original majors. He had Carrington and Captain Tenike, who was a trained engineer, had made maps of the fort establishment. And when we did archaeology on the parade ground, and there were 2 posts around where the flagpole was, and 2 posts down delineating the pathway from the main pathway into the parade ground, or into the flagpole. And we hit the original wood in, I think, 8 out of 12. You know, and you dig down, and you know there wasn't any big cedar posts growing out there at any time, so it was definitely something to do with that. So the archaeology of it is rather interesting. There has been some archaeology done. If you can read through archaeology, it's sometimes I enjoy reading archaeology, and sometimes like Chinese water torture. You know, somebody spend a whole day there staring at one of those pieces of melted glass and think they've got the diamonds or something. But yeah, we know quite a bit about Fort Kearney, but there's still a lot out there that needs to be. There's some outbuildings and things that need to be established more than that. Any other comment? No? Anybody? How are we doing on time, Judy?
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, next one I'd just like to talk a little bit is Nelson's story. Again, Mary Ellen was deeply involved in his history. Nelson's story had come up here and brought a bunch of cattle from Texas, drove through. He defied, his story is he defied Colonel Carrington, brought his cattle through and up to Montana and made a fortune that way. And he did do well. He made a fortune that way. He also managed to make enough of a fortune to where he went on and did other things, such as building some of the first, I guess, 20-some foot story, I guess you'd consider stories would be, buildings out in Los Angeles. He built some of the taller early buildings out in Los Angeles. So he's quite the entrepreneur. Also, when Fort C.F. Smith closed in 1868 up here, and they had trouble, the Army was selling everything off, and fire sailing, all the goods, the paints, ordnance supplies. Story came down with some wagons and bought a bunch of it and made a killing. He bought like a can of paint for, 3 cents down there from the quartermaster department from the guy dispensing the items at Fort C.F. Smith. Take it up to Bozeman and sell it for $10 for quitting and for yelling. So anyway, he was a good entrepreneur. There was a movie out that still plays there every so often in the late television stuff on the Western channels called The Tall Man. And I think Clark Gable, they don't mention his story as such, he's just fictitious name, but the story is there.
Randolph Scott.
Was it Randolph? Oh, I thought it was Clark Gable. Okay, Randolph Scott, okay. Well, I will defer to you on that. Yeah, but anyway, so there have been these stories off and on. And I think last year before last, we played the movie here of Tomahawk, which was about the fort, and it had Van Heflin as a very youthful Jim Bridger. And it was interesting because it was made in 1952, and so I was 1 year old and didn't quite have the ability to critique it at that stage in the game. But it was a very good movie, and I highly recommend it. It's still available. You can still buy it, from these old film places. Or actually, Amazon has it. You can buy it from Amazon. But it's good, except for a few things. They have the wagon box and the Fetterman fight the same day on this grassy knoll in California. But so anyway, and that, as far as I know, that's the only whole movie about Fort Phil Kearny that's ever been made. That's made in 1952. So that's so you were asking about where Fort Phil Kearny's been made into a movie. Well, it had. It's called Tomahawk. Okay, and it has an interesting group of characters in it. Civilians, just want to touch briefly on the fact that there were a number of civilian employees here. This is really an economic magnet for drawing people in. And let's see, oops, where we're at here. But anyway, and there was a pretty good desertion rates at times from Fort Phil Kearny, and especially wagon trains were going through, and they could like look up the wagon train going up to Montana. The soldiers would desert and hopefully get out of the Jersey to the Army and do that. But just by way of how they must have felt, like I mentioned that the private was making like $13 or $16 a month. I can't remember which at that time that changed. And the sergeant was making like $17 a month. So you had the clerk, civilian clerks for the administration. It's how things have not changed that much in our world. 2 clerks, and one was getting paid $150 and one was getting paid $125 a month. A storekeeper, $100 a month. 3 mail carriers at $10 a day. There's like $620 there. And then there's some that were less. I guess I didn't have to go as far or something. But anyway, guides, on and on it goes. But 5 ambulance drivers at $45 a month, $225. 6 laborers, 1 at $45 a month, and 5 at $35 a month. But when you compare that to $13 or $17 a month, you can see where these soldiers kind of saying, hey, and especially when they were having to cut the trees and bring them down, and then the civilians would supervise construction or do the construction. So it's interesting that it was, and it drew a lot of people in, like people like Finn Burnett, who's Alan Simpson's great-grandfather, our former past party senator, and others. So it is interesting that that it was quite lucrative to work at Fort Kearny. In fact, I would like to see someone do a comparison study like what we paid during the Iraq wars and things like that for civilian contractors, and then I compare that to what happened out at Fort Phil Kearny. And I'm afraid you're going to find out things haven't changed that much. It's a pretty lucrative deal to do things for the Army that way. And of course, we don't do that anymore.
Can you tell me if, it was actually a rule or a law that, these trains and cattle herds, if they were gonna calve, they had to stay a certain distance from the fort?
Yes, it was. They had to stay a certain distance, but they all had to stay fairly close. And that's where Nelson Story had his blow up with Carrington. Carrington wanted him to stick around. He's kind of hoping he'd sell his herd to the army there. He said, well, if I blackmail this guy by not letting him go on, he's gonna have to break down eventually and sell his cattle herd to us. And then Story took off in the middle of the night and got away, you know, and managed to sell it that way. But yeah, there was, well, the grazing. You look at, you know, when you got several hundred animals to graze, you have several things going. One, you want to put up hay for the winter, because it's going to get tough. And two, you got to graze the animals during the spring, fall, and summer months. And that's where like the Bailey party, as guards came in, and then they'd have like, and so a lot of that was turned over to civilians. But and then the soldiers out there. Soldiers are also heavily involved in that duties of that kind of thing. But it's interesting because you had to go further and further afield. They were cutting hay over on Big Goose by the mountains and bringing that back in ricks, you know, wagon ricks, you know, rags with racks on it. They were bringing that back to the fort. They're grazing their animals down to, you know, to south of Lake Smith. They had no choice. So what did that do? Well, one, it meant that you had to have more men, you had to protect, and you had to protect the detachment soldiers, to protect the herders. And secondly, the Indians could pick and choose when they wanted to hit. You know, they would see like a, you know, some type of a bottleneck or some area that, you know, was a weakness in their movement up and down to these grazing and haying areas. And the Indians, and it wouldn't be big groups of Indians, it'd be like maybe 30, 40 warriors, maybe up to 100. But they didn't hit, and that was the secret. It was just a hit and run, guerrilla tactics, very much as a guerrilla warfare that way. I don't know where I went with that one, but you guys, you got another one? Yes.
Just in comparison on wages, on the typhoon, the cook, you didn't mention what the cook got paid.
Oh, well, let me see if I got a cook. Let me
In
see.
the typhoon area, the cook got paid $50 a month, the tie hacks got paid 30.
30 for that guy had? Cook, coal miners, we had 2 coal miners for $35 a month. 1 blacksmith for $80 a month, 1 engineer, $75. Oh, here we go. 2 cooks, $45 a month.
That's not much.
Well, of course, you know, yeah, it was,
It's a hell of a lot more than 13.
it was about $40 before the tie hack, you know. I mean, 40 years. You know, it's about 40 years before the tie hack operation and stuff.
How did they power the sawmill?
They started out with a horse-powered one that had like a big horse. They'd have like a team of horses, and they used the centrifugal force of that. And then later, they went to a steam and then a water power. You can still go down the creek there and find the remains of some of the diversion dams. Up on the fort site itself, there's a frame for a Lane and Botley sawmill. And we did find a catalog from like 1858 showing that sawmill. And then there's an arm and some other things, or I mean, yeah, kind of an arm for turning the wheel. The sawmill, it always was kind of they had 2 or 3 of them going at any time. They sometimes ran one over closer to the mountain, around Story. But I remember when my man, George Dandy, got here, and he said that the engineer that was running the sawmill was a drunken fellow that wasn't worth anything. And that's why their production was so low. And Dandy did high production. He was doing like 400,000 board feet a month in the summer of 1867. And so it was quite, you know, and so well, let's see what sawmill operators got. Oh, actually, that's a handy little list, you know, just kind of, whoops. Oh, here we go. Sawyers. And glasses again. So Sawyers, it goes by month, like most times they only had one, they go up to 5 in August, September, when they're doing the summer cutting. Looks like they were getting about $50 a month. Yeah, so I mean, it was a lucrative place to work, and it did draw people in, like Phillips, like the Bailey Party, and like others, there's other names, John Bratt, and I think a bunch of them, that did come here, to work on at Fort Phil Kearny. Yes.
Yeah, Sonny, the Sutler store out there, I know recently a coin was found out there that was like a script coin or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a company's name on it, and it apparently was a company that had Sutler stores at other ports in the west. So was that a government contract and this was a branch?
Well, it wasn't really
Was it contracted or did they just come out on their own?
Oh, no, they had to be licensed by the government. And the government was trying to phase out these stores and things. Didn't work, kept on going into the 1880s. But yeah, that would be just script, and you could only use it there, which made it pretty handy. You're out in Fort Phil Kearny in the middle of nowhere. They aren't gonna give you money so you can run away to Virginia City. They give you the script, and then you owe your soul to the company store, So yeah, and that would have been something like that. I can't remember.
I would imagine that whoever was the head of the Sutler store probably did pretty well as well.
Oh, yeah, well, and Finn Burnett, again, mentioned him, Simpsons are his descendants. But Finn Burnett, but what a life that must have been. You go in and you got the big old wood stove there, fired up and going, and you got Jim Bridger sitting there telling stories. Heck, more fun than having dinner with me. But anyway, it was yeah, and I haven't seen that, so I'm gonna have to, when I go out there next time, I'm gonna have to ask Sherry to show me the script, I guess.
It had the name of the company.
I can't remember.
She said she looked it up,
Okay.
and they had stores at other posts.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah. Nancy, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Nancy's family were heavily involved in the early stores.
so it's like a franchise, I guess.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, it would have been, just like the primary civilian wagon train was Wells Fargo. And they hauled all this stuff up here, and then they contracted to haul it all away again after yeah, really, yeah.
Wells Fargo, I think traditionally used oxen.
Yeah, and that was a wise thing, considering the water problem in here, the weight of those wagons, those are freight wagons, so you're rocking, 25, 2,000 up to 3,000 some pounds. And then mules, big mules might be able to take it. Horses were not very adaptable to that kind of work. But oxen were good because they'd eat about anything. You could sit there and give them a perfect pair, they'd survive. And and they
didn't stampede.
And they didn't stampede. Them stampedes might be getting across Main Street here, I'm sure. But yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Can you just really quick, because it's always fascinated me, Carrington's second wife,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote the novel.
Frances
Yeah,
Brumman.
can you talk just a little bit about Frances and
Yeah.
how they got together and what she wrote?
Oh, okay. Well, it had started out, her family were a prominent family in Franklin, Tennessee. And HB and I have a good time visiting about that, because he's from Franklin. My great-grandfather fought in the Battle of Franklin.
Well, nearby, but not in Franklin. I said, I'm not from Franklin, but nearby.
Oh, nearby,
You're not
okay.
his great-grandfather, though.
No,
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I always tease my friend Sam Morton.
Good shape for everyone.
Yeah. Now, Sam Morton, my friend Sam Morton, so Sam. He was, his favorite general is Patrick Cleburne, the Confederate general. He was killed at Franklin. So I always tease Frank, or I always tease Sam that, my great grandfather shot Patrick Claiborne. Which, nobody can prove me wrong, so I got a 50-50 chance of being right. Any other questions on, I know we're kind of getting, yes, Dave.
So if you go up on that ridge above Story, I still find a lot of crosscut sauces.
Mhm.
I know.
Mhm.
You can see where they hit them with an axe and then
Yeah.
where the crosscuts on the back.
Sure.
And they're all really old.
Yeah,
And they cut up pretty darn high on the land.
sure.
You see where the old pictures, all the trees are gone.
Oh, they were. Yeah, they worked them over, and then what they didn't work over, the civilian pioneer families that came in, got, figured out a bunch of them.
So I still know a little bit of lumber up there.
Uh-huh.
Most of it is what we know is from about 1890.
Yeah, that'd be the new growth from the fort, yeah, second growth, yeah.
Second growth.
Yeah.
But you can still find a bunch of them old stone stuff.
Mhm. And they didn't use a saw to cut the tree down, sometimes they show like a buck, two guys like cutting the tree. They felled the trees with axes, and then they sawed them horizontally.
They back cut them.
Yeah, then they back cut them when they were down on the ground, and then they cut them with a saw.
If the stumps are high, I imagine that's.
Well, they were hitting them with an axe, but the sawmill here, you took them right down to ground level. You can do it with a chainsaw, you can't do it.
No, those guys, man, they're cutting as fast as they could too. You're looking over your shoulder, and next thing you know, arrow goes whizzing by. It's quitting time.
So I still got some drives up there that weren't cut,
Oh, really?
and have some of those really big oak trees.
Really?
And,
Well,
and
yeah.
I'm pretty sure they didn't get into some, mesquite jumps.
Oh, okay.
And so-
Yeah. Yes.
I think we got sidetracked. Did you finish answering her question about Francis Drummond?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we did, didn't we? Yeah. Yeah. That's why they don't make me the spokesman for the administration. Okay. Iranians? Yeah, I got a good restaurant the other day. Anyway, but Francis Grumman, the Grumman family were prominent there, and during the Battle of Franklin, they were Union sympathizers. And so they took care of the Union wounded after the battle. And one of the provost marshals that came in there after the battle was a gentleman from the 14th of Michigan named George Grumman. And so he swept Frances off her feet, and they ended up getting married. He brought her out here, and you might know the story, she's pregnant when she showed here. And then so after George Grumman was killed in the Fetterman fight, then she had to leave the post. So she went with the Carringtons down to, eventually down to, or whatever it was, down to Sedgwick or something like that. And then and for several years, she didn't have much contact with. She read where Margaret Solomon, or Margaret Carrington, had died in 1870. She started to correspond with Henry, and the next thing you know, that romance sparked. And then she was with him, up till the time they came out here in 1908 to dedicate the monument. And then she, in turn, wrote her own book. That one I'm not going to get into, but her book, My Army Life on Plains, or My Army Life, and she wrote that, and so it's a second. But some of it seems like a little bit of my crib for Margaret's book. Some of it's original stuff. I think Henry had a heavier hand on her book than he had on Margaret's. And Henry had usually had an objective in his writing and everything. It's to save his, try to restore his reputation. Because everybody said, he's the reason. Those Indians were starving at the gate. That's why they killed Fetterman. Would let him back to the fort. Well, you can go on that. But and then I read one account in 1867, 68, when the Southern campaigns were going on the Southern Plains, and Custer and the 7th Cavalry came to Fort Sedgwick, I think it was, and Carrington was stationed there. Carrington had this long account of him and, Custer going out negotiating with the Indians. And it's kind of like Carrington did this, and he built the fire and started a pipe or some dang thing, you know. Well, and you read Custer's account, he says he refused to have dinner with Carrington, you know, because of the tragedy that happened. And he's blackballed. So I don't know, you know, who do you go with on that? But anyway, but then Frances, yeah, she had a long life and lived up until, you know, I think 1912. And then in turn, you know, she had written her book, and then they came out here and for the monument dedication and just a Fortville Kearney reunion in 1908. So, but yeah, but her background pretty much was that she was coming from a strong Unionist family in Tennessee, which there was a lot of back then. And then she also, you know, made contact and reestablished with Henry Carrington, and eventually meeting them to marry and having a number of children of theirs. And so you got to kind of watch it when somebody says they're a Carrington descendant. Which family, you know? Because she had several children with Henry, and then of course Margaret. And most of Margaret and Henry's kids did survive, but you know, 2 or 3 did. So yeah, but her book is good, and I recommend the two of them together. You read Absaraka, and then you also read My Army Life. Any other questions there?
Well, got one that's kind of off the wall. Did you speculate on why there is a large brass ship's compass in the Occidental Hotel in Buffalo?
So the drunks can find their way home at night?
Well, how else do these people find their way across these trackless prairies without somebody that can navigate? And
Well,
compass?
a lot of times they had topographical engineers with them, you know.
Somebody with seafaring experience?
Well, not necessarily seafaring, but they would teach, you know, find your way by the stars. And it was taught at West Point, you know, how to, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of it was taught in the context of the eastern United States. You get out here, and they say, well, just go from tree to tree. What trees? You know? And then of course you have Jim Bridger or somebody like that there. And he's never lost. He might confused once in a while. And you know, you all know that feeling out there. So, anyway, but a lot of it, and you know, people had skills back then. It surprised you. You know, somebody had been a surveyor, or somebody had been something. You know, they brought those skills with them when they came out there. And you know, so I really can't, you know, say that every situation was the same. It certainly wasn't. I suppose by the fact there'd be a number of graves in certain places, so their navigator wasn't very good. But as far as the navigation, I say you had a guide, yeah, like a Jim Bridger or a Kit Carson or somebody like that. That was one good way. And then very often there's more and more topographical engineers are the elite of the West Point graduates. They're the top ones, you know, they're the ones that have the most respect. And but it was one of the situations, and some people had skills you'd never expect, like Lieutenant Ortenike, who was the captain out here, and Carrington put him in charge of the building of the fort. Well, he had built buildings before. He's in the lumber business back in Minnesota, Wisconsin, wherever he came from. He was in the lumber business, and he was also a surveyor. You know, so he knew that. And sometimes,
Maybe it was his company.
maybe it might have been. Yeah, I mean, well, just like how they track, you know, they had a pedometer or a wheeldometer, whatever. They had a device on their on one of their wagons wheels that would count distance for them. So these guys didn't have to guess. Well, from yonder to yonder, it looks like 10 million miles to me. They could actually tell you.
Same reason the ship threw a rope with knots in it.
Well, yeah.
Tell how far they went.
Yeah, and that would work too good in the prairie. You know, yeah, going one big rope.
Clicker on your wheel and you go.
Yeah. make her through. Any other questions before I go to I see we're kind of moving along here, so I'm gonna cut down on some things and just a few of them. And I'd just like to talk about Sergeants George Grant and Graham. And but Grant and Graham, Bob Murray wrote a good article about them, and Father Barry Hagan also addressed it. So in that spring of 1867, after the Fetterman fight, there had been no contact with Fort C.S. Smith to the north. There was contact down to Fort Reno, but going north there wasn't any. And so, and Henry Wessels, General Henry Wessels, was colonel, he's a Civil War general, was bred on race. He's trying to get somebody to go up and reestablish contact, find out if C.S. Smith even still existed, or the Indians had burned it down or anything. And so he tried to get various guides and people, and none of the mail carriers or guides would touch it for less than $1,000 to make that trip up there. But he found two sergeants, Grant and Graham, and George Grant's the one I'll be talking mostly about. But so these two sergeants from different companies, they decided to make the trip, and so they give them each a Spencer carbine, state-of-the-art gun for that time, and lots of ammunition. And they didn't have any horses or mules, though. So it's 90 miles from here to Fort C.S. Smith, and it was still snowing. It was still a lot of terrain that was snowed in, drifts and things like that. So they took off on foot, and they made let's see, got to look at my note here on this one here. They took out on February 4th, 1867. They were promised that they would get some great financial compensation. In the end, they didn't get it. They got stiffed on that one. But anyway, so they established a cold camp the night of February 4th. Then they kept walking, and so they go through this whole area. Well, you'd think they'd be, the Indians would be the problem. And there were Indian parties out, but it was kind of luck of the draw if they catch you or not. And they felt pretty good, I think, with those Spencer rifles. So February 7th, they made it to Fort C.S. Smith. And they had to build snow, in some cases they had made snowshoes, like out of willow branches and stuff, to get through some of the deeper snow. They only had cold camps. They didn't have any fire going during that period. They just cold camped and ate turkey or whatever the heck they had to go with at that stage. So they rested for a couple of days at C.S. Smith, and then the commander at C.S. Smith gave them some letters to take back to Colonel Carrington. But anyway, C.S. Smith had done well. They had established contact with the Yelkin Valley and Bozeman, and they were getting fresh potatoes, things like that. Well, the guys down at Fort Kearney was, chasing down any little bug that come out of the woodwork down there. So on the return trip, they started out February 9th, and for their guide, they had Mitch Boyer. You never heard of Mitch Boyer? He's one of the more famous characters from the Battle of Little Bighorn. And he was part Sioux and part French, and he ended up a French trapper, but he ended up getting killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. He survived this one though. So they start out with horses, and maybe I had packing with them too. And so they take off on their journey, and let me see if Judy, is this book still in print? You know?
I do not know.
Okay, so this is Robert A. Murray's The Army on Powder River. If you haven't read it, it's well worth it. I think this is a newer one. I think they sell it out for, I think, but I hope it's still in print. It's really good. It's quite an excellent. Let's see. Bear with me, folks. Give my voice a little rest here too.
Back in those days, I think it was expected that your foot troops should be able to walk 28 miles a day. So that was about right for them to leave on the 4th of February.
Yeah, well, it was winter.
They were making 30 miles a day.
They were in shape. Quality of shoes and things they had back then.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah, I mean, the leather in their shoes would fall apart, their clothing was just, you know, yeah, the Army contracts during the Civil War. You know, anyway, they took off, let's see. Okay. Starting on the morning of the 7th, they stopped at 6 a.m. and built a fire for the first time. This is probably near Fort Lewis where they're going up. And they brought the first news of the Fetterman fight to Fort Smith. The Great Crow Indians had been visiting it, reported it before. So they take off, then they're coming back with Mick Boyer riding horses, and got mail and everything that they left right at dusk. And then they run across a fresh killed buffalo, it was a sure Indian sign. Pretty soon they're going along the foothills of Bighorn, up around a date in that area. And they were attacked, or not attacked, but had 15 Indians tracking them. And so Graham and Boyer, their horses are doing pretty good. Grant's horse gives out. And there was no ride with me buddy thing or anything like that. He just got left him. Or maybe he told him to leave him. But he takes off. He's got his Spencer rifle, so he feels pretty confident in his firepower. He goes over and somewhere around, up on Tongue River or somewhere up there where there's some kind of bluffs and areas. And he gets down underneath of a ledge up there. And 13 of the Indians go on chasing Boyer and Graham towards Fort Phil Kearny. 2 of them, though, get on to Grant, and one of them looks down in there, and Grant kills him with his, looks under the ledge, and Grant kills him with his Spencer, and the guy drops down, and his Henry rifle he's carried dropped down beside him there. And the other one jumped down in there, and he landed right beside Grant, scared him so bad he fell over the cliff. And so Grant, he's doing pretty good. He's got 2 Indians. He's got this really nice Henry rifle. To this day, it's debated whether that was one of the Wheatley Fisher rifles or not. I don't know. I couldn't tell you on that one. If you're familiar with that argument, well, everybody wonders what happened with Wheatley Fisher guns from the Fetterman fight, 2 Henry rifles. Hey, are they? Well, you know more than I do then, because I don't know. Anyway, so after the Indians give up the pursuit on him, he killed the 2 that were pursuing him, he takes off, and Grant and Graham ride their horse. They get to Fort Phil Kearny, and they said, I think Grant's done for. He's back there, and Indians were after him. Well, later that day, here comes Grant walking into the post. His feet were all wrecked. He had to make sandals out of his army overcoat. His shoes, he didn't have any shoes left. And he gets there. And so Colonel Wessels writes him up in a nice citation, Grant and Graham, what they did there. Grant says, how about our money? Well, we'll get around that one day. Grant spent quite a few more years in the Army. And in 1971, he asked me, hey, how about that money for that trip to Fort Phil Kearny? And he said, well, we're not going to give you that, but we're going to give you the Medal of Honor. So they gave him the Medal of Honor. This is the only Medal of Honor awarded at Fort Phil Kearny. Other events such as Max Littman coming out in the wagon box fight and holding off the Indians, well, Samuel Gibson and another picket got inside, that didn't get the Medal of Honor. They didn't, I might have got mentioned, that's always amazed me. And and finally he got the Medal of Honor in 1871 in lieu of the money. But it always amazed me that all that action at Fort Phil Kearny, and it was a bloody situation, guerrilla warfare and everything. Only 1 Medal of Honor was ever awarded out there. This one to Sergeant George Grant. And we go to other events, such as the Little Bighorn. There were, I think I wrote it down. I think there was 19 Medals of Honor. Yes.
Sonny,
I'm bringing a book by Wendy Wallace now about the Little Bighorn.
Mm-hmm.
38 battles between Red Cloud's War and the Great Sioux War, 75. 38 battles. Guess how many medals of honor the Army gave out?
How many?
754.
Well, they give
It's
like,
all- when you study West Point, that's how they do it. They want you to talk about the medals of honor and not about the battles. So it must have been a brave battle, and it's actually shocking that guys get a medal of honor for putting a guy a canteen full of water.
oh yeah, well, that was it at the Little
Yes,
Bighorn.
sir.
Well, during World War II, I can't remember the battle, was it Antietam or one of those? William McKinley, our future president, and he got a Medal of Honor for hauling hot meals up to the troops, at the line. Make sure everybody had a hot meal, so he's one stage above, one of these pizza places, I guess.
Iwo Jima had 14, by the way.
Oh, Medals of Honor. Well, those are all Marines, weren't they? But anyway, so that was kind of, that's always kind of great. And just to top that off a little bit more, the Battle of Wounded Knee, they had 28 medals of honor at the Battle of Wounded Knee. And,
There was, just in the last several weeks, there was a review
oh, those
of
medals?
medal citations.
Yeah, I saw
They
that.
decided to let them stand.
Oh, yeah, well, they did, but I'm sure that I remember who was the captain that was at the Little Bighorn, then got killed at Wounded Knee. But, anyway, I think he might have been one that one. But, anyway, but isn't that something, 28 at Wounded Knee, in any way you look at it, that was a massacre, in the truest sense. And then, 19 at Little Bighorn, and then one for 2 years out at Fort Kilcarney, what those guys went through. Under these type of rules, everybody at the wagon block should have got a Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
And the only one that did was Grant. It wasn't for that, it was for the walk.
Yeah.
Down to Fort C.S. Smith. I think I'm probably gonna start to cut it off there, because I've got 2 or 3 more, but I think our time's going down, my voice is starting to go. And I hope you got your money's worth, so. So, huh?
We got what we paid for.
There's a tip jar up here, sorry.
Well, I think I saw where the firing pin marks from the cartridges found at the Fetterman site, the
Mhm.
2 Henry rifles,
Uh-huh.
were matched with a pair of rifles that were in the possession of Ute Indians in Colorado.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting. Now, can you imagine the trading on that?
Yeah.
You got a Cheyenne or a Sioux sitting there negotiating with these Utes or whatever. Yeah, I got this one here. It was in the Fetterman fight.
Well, another little sidebar on that is that if you had a Henry rifle, there was no source of ammunition for it. It would be more useful down to the south in Colorado where you could actually get bullets for them.
Yeah, true. You're right. Yeah, and plus it was kind of a finicky gun. If you didn't clean it and do everything right, it jammed up on you pretty fast. And so I think there's a lot of this having one to wave up in the air when you make your charge or whatever, then go to your bow and arrow. Any other thoughts and questions? Anything I didn't get everything done that I wanted to do, but I think we got enough.
You did fine.
Okay. Well, thank you, I appreciate that. Good Lord willing, I'll do it again for you before I leave this world. Okay.